Jeff walked out of the bar deep in thought. He would be 30 years old in just 2 weeks and had very little to show for it. There was a decent job, a string of short relationships, and a lot of bills. He never thought his life would have turned out like this. He was smart, athletic, and well-educated. Although he wasn't every girl's dream, he was attractive by most standards and had his share of relationships with desirable women. Unfortunately, none of the relationships had lasted more than a few months. At this point, he was starting to worry that it was a trend without an end in sight. He considered himself a good guy and had always wanted a family. It was beginning to make him doubt himself and his future. He was having a lousy Friday night. It was midnight, and he was walking out of the bars alone again. At least since it wasn't cloudy, the moon lit up the streets and made it seem a little less depressing than it should have been. It all made him wonder if things would ever turn around. As he turned the corner, he noticed the street was a little more deserted than usual. He attributed it to everyone still being in the bars having a good time, or on their way home to have a better one. As he walked past the alley on the east side of the intersection, a noise attracted Jeff's attention. He peered into the darkness between the two buildings, and his heart stopped. There was a young woman struggling with two men. They were dressed in jeans and torn shirts. Both wore the same color bandanas, making Jeff suspect they were in a gang. It would have been normal for the neighborhood. The crime was getting worse in that section of the city, and he wondered why the hell she was there alone at that time of night. He was quiet as he tried to decide what the situation was before doing something stupid. From her struggles, he was almost certain this wasn't some kind of game. After a few moments, his eyes adjusted and he could see she was a petite brunette, about 5 feet tall, thin, and well-dressed. But what Jeff noticed most was that she was drop-dead gorgeous. Confident that this was a real attack, he pulled out his cell phone and stepped back away from the alley. 911. A woman's voice answered. Please state your emergency. I'm on the corner of Superior and Wabash. There's a woman being attacked in the alley by a couple of thugs. Please hurry. Sir, I have officers on the way. Please wait for them and don't get involved. A muffled scream put an end to that thought for Jeff. He cautiously glanced around the edge of the building and saw that the girl was being held from behind by one man as the other ripped her shirt. He reached a hand inside to cup one of her jugs, and Jeff couldn't stop himself from walking toward them. He set the phone down on a garbage can so the operator might be able to hear some of what was happening. Hey, what's going on? He demanded. The man in front of the girl whirled around to face him. You need to mind your own business. We're all friends here. The girl moaned through the hand the pumpkin back had put over her mouth. Jeff quickly did the math on the situation. If neither man had a gun, he was confident he had a chance. The alley was wide enough for him to maneuver, giving him the room he'd need to deal with 2 men at once. He hoped for an element of surprise on his side, because he didn't appear to be an imposing opponent. At under 6 feet tall and about 185 pounds, he wasn't going to frighten anyone based on his imposing image. What they didn't know was the years of martial arts training he went through in his mid-20s and the tournament fights he participated in. He wasn't overconfident. His teachers had thoroughly taught him the need to have the proper amount of respect for an adversary. Any fight can be lost if you slip, turn an ankle, miss a punch, or make any one of 100 other mistakes that can happen in the heat of the moment. Also, he had to hope neither of the hoods was holding any surprises for him. No matter what, Jeff couldn't let them hurt this girl. Her eyes pleaded with him for help, and he wouldn't be able to live with himself if he didn't try to protect her. When he refused to move, the man in front of her showed him the knife in his hand. His partner holding the girl nodded and said, "Take him." Jeff tried to appear unnerved, hoping he could still avoid a fight. "Listen, nobody has to get hurt here. Just let her go and we'll head the other way." The man with the knife sneered and said, "Only one of us is going to get hurt. You should have kept walking." Jeff saw the man tense as he moved forward. He swung the knife in a wide arc, keeping it around chest level. Jeff smoothly stepped inside and blocked the thug's arm with both hands. His right hand flashed out quickly and caught the attacker in the cheek with the back of his fist. Jeff continued his movement, stepping under the man's arm, grabbing his wrist and turning it in. The punk dropped the knife with a whine, and Jeff finished the move he had practiced thousands of times with a roundhouse kick to the ribs. As the man doubled over in pain, Jeff stepped in and finished him off with an elbow strike to the nose. He was rewarded with a loud breaking sound and a cry of pain as the man dropped to the ground. Jeff stepped back and looked at the man holding the girl. Now that he was closer, he could make out her condition. She had been roughed up a little, with her face showing several cuts and scratches. He still hoped to get out of this without any more violence. It was possible the girl could get hurt in the melee, or that he could lose, putting her in even more jeopardy than before. "I'm telling you, let her go and we'll walk. You can get your friend and go your own way. Neither of us wants to get hurt. Just let her go." Jeff considered telling him about the call to the police, but worried that the piece of shit might panic and hurt the girl, or decide his only option was to take her hostage. The man looked like he was considering the offer, but suddenly threw her into some garbage cans against the brick wall. She fell to the ground in a heap. The thug stepped quickly toward Jeff, hoping to catch him off guard. Jeff retreated a couple of steps, trying to get a clue about this man's proficiency with a knife. The first one was sloppy and easy, but he wasn't about to make any assumptions. Jeff guessed the man was about 6 feet tall, 200 pounds. His height gave him a little advantage, especially while using a knife. As he stepped forward, Jeff made a dangerous gamble. He quickly slid his back foot up to his front one, raising his knee high. The man fell for it and raised his hands to protect his face, putting too much weight on his front leg. Jeff brought his left leg down with all his force, catching the other man just on the inside of his knee. The joint gave way with a sickening thud, bending to an impossible angle. As the man hit the ground with a scream, Jeff stepped back to keep from getting hit with a frantic swing from the prone attacker. He was trying to decide what to do about the man who was still a potential threat when he heard startled cry, "Look out!" He looked up and saw the girl staring past him with a fear in her eyes. He realized something bad was about to happen, so guessed a direction and spun quickly while stepping away. Unfortunately, he guessed wrong and felt an explosion across his chest. The pain hit him a fraction of a second later. He took another step back as he realized he was facing a new adversary. This one must have come from the street. He was wielding the knife the first man had dropped. Jeff was afraid to bring his hand to his chest. He knew the wound was bad and didn't want anything to distract him from the man in front of him. There couldn't be any more mistakes, or he knew he wouldn't be walking out of the alley again. The new man made small motions with the knife, waiting for Jeff to commit himself, or for the loss of blood to take its toll. When Jeff felt a wave of dizziness hit him, he decided to act immediately. If he waited much longer, it wouldn't matter anyway. He stepped forward and threw a quick jab that missed badly. This gave his opponent an opening, and he moved in with a stab aimed at Jeff's chest. This was what Jeff had been hoping for, and he twisted, bringing his left arm across to push the knife wide of its target. This kept his right arm free, and he brought it across, hitting the man as hard as he could across the bridge of the nose. It caused his assailant to stumble back into some other trash cans, where he fell hard. Unfortunately, due to his injury, Jeff now lacked the strength to cause the kind of damage he had earlier. He knew the man wouldn't stay down and didn't believe he'd be able to finish him off. "Where are the police?" he thought angrily. His momentary distraction was the second mistake he had hoped to avoid. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a quick flash, then felt the side of his head erupt in pain. The force of the blow spun him into the wall. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog. When he looked up, he realized he could no longer focus. There were no more options. The fight was over, and he had lost. He faced the man who had just hit him, his first opponent, who had used Jeff's distraction with the others to recover enough to get to his feet and hit him with a pipe he found laying on the ground. The first punch he learned in his martial arts training was a unique one. The teacher wanted to reinforce how dangerous fighting could be in order to discourage students from being too eager to get into trouble. He chose to show them how to turn their hand on an angle and strike the target with the bone just below the base of the index finger. The blow was supposed to catch the opponent in the windpipe, which would stun virtually anyone. The thing that made the class understand how serious it could be was when the teacher explained that hitting your opponent in the wrong spot could be fatal. You could collapse his windpipe or cause him to bleed into his lungs. It was a lesson Jeff never forgot, causing him to avoid fights at all costs. Now it was all he had left. He stepped in and punched as hard as he could, ignoring the throbbing pain in his chest. Whether it was skill or just dumb luck, he struck the man exactly where he intended. He was rewarded with a strangled cry as the man stumbled back to the wall and fell. Jeff staggered as he was hit with another wave of dizziness. He also realized it was becoming impossible to focus his eyes at all. He heard a trash can fall and knew that the man who cut him was getting back up. There were no more tricks to play, so he quickly considered his last action. He decided to give the girl as much of a chance as possible. The police had to be close. He stumbled toward her and fell. He pulled himself on top of her, covering her body with his, and whispered, "The police are on the way. You just have to stay away from them a few more minutes." He marveled at how hard he must have been hit. He heard a ringing in his head, and it was rising in intensity. He couldn't shut out the noise as he felt himself slipping into unconsciousness. Suddenly, the alley was filled with blinding light. Then everything went black. The noise was no longer a loud ringing sound. Instead, it was a soft, repetitive tone. Jeff slowly realized he was hearing the sounds of machines operating quietly. It was completely dark, and he wondered if he was still in the alley. Suddenly, he remembered the girl. He tried to sit up, but only got his head off of the pillow before the pain overtook him. He groaned loudly, his head falling back down. "Don't move," he heard a soft female voice say. He felt a warm hand on his shoulder, gently restraining him. "Sara, get the doctor. He's awake." Jeff heard the sound of footsteps, followed by a doorknob being turned. As he heard the door click shut, the voice returned. "Don't be afraid. You're in the hospital. Everything's okay now. You just need to relax. Your sister was here, but she had to leave to pick up her kids. She'll be back in a couple of hours." He felt a wave of nausea sweep over him as he tried to think. "Who are you?" The high-pitched voice answered, "My name is Paige. You saved me in the alley." He heard her sniff, trying to hold back tears. "I can't believe you did that. It was the bravest thing I've ever seen." Jeff felt a pair of soft hands grasp his. He tried to joke. "It wasn't that brave. Trust me, I was scared out of my mind." He wondered why she didn't just turn on the light. He felt her pull his hand up to her face, and she dragged her cheek across it. "Trust me, you don't know what scared is. I don't know how to thank you. I'm just glad you're all right. When I saw all the blood, I was afraid." Her voice trailed off. Jeff knew he had been extremely lucky. He was getting frustrated by only being able to hear her voice. He remembered how beautiful she was and wanted a chance to see her. "Paige, would you turn on the light? It would be nice to actually meet you face to face." She hesitated. "Jeff, the lights are on. So we believe once the swelling goes down, your sight will return. I'm sorry, but there are no guarantees." Jeff laid there in shock as he listened to the doctor trying to sound encouraging without promising anything. The hit he took in the head from the pipe had given him a concussion. It had caused hemorrhaging and swelling that was putting pressure against his optic nerve. The temporary part was what scared him. Nobody was sure if it would be okay in a week, a month, a year, or maybe never. The doctors considered surgery, but because it could be risky, preferred using medication and time to deal with it for now. They had his eyes bandaged, even though the vision loss was total at this point. There had been some improvement in the 3 days he had been hospitalized, but not enough to be sure he would make a full recovery. The doctor let him know that if he didn't make significant improvement in the next few days, they would have to consider surgery to relieve the pressure. The blood loss from the chest wound almost killed him, but turned out to be far less serious than the concussion. The cut wasn't too deep, so there wasn't severe muscle damage. The doctor warned him not to try saving any more damsels in distress for a while, but said he would make a full recovery in a relatively short period of time. They thought his condition would keep him there for 2 or 3 weeks, if there were no complications from the head injury. After explaining everything that had happened and what to expect, he excused himself. He motioned for Jeff's sister Katie to follow him out of the room. When they got back to his office, the doctor explained everything that was involved with Jeff's injury and his recovery. Covering the eyes is not essential, but in a case like this, there are a few good reasons to consider it. First, he will have complete blindness for a short time, and his sight will gradually recover as the swelling recedes. Without the bandages, he will constantly strain to try and see, which can cause severe migraines. Second, I want him to completely rest with as little stress as possible. The injury to his chest will force him to be immobile, so he'll be here anyway. There's no reason for him to do anything but heal. Third, I'm concerned about the potential for depression. If he sees little or no progress day after day, his chances of slipping into a depressed state will be increased. My best guess would be, we're looking at about 3 weeks for significant progress, although we'll need to monitor him closely to have a better idea. Katie listened intently and considered everything he said. I'll go with your recommendations. I know my brother. He isn't known for being patient. It would be best to force him to rest and give him no other options. Good. Then assuming we can treat this without surgery, we should know a lot more in a week or so. We'll keep a close watch on his progress, and I'll let you know if there are any changes in his condition. When Katie left with the doctor, Paige took Jeff's hand. Your sister will be back in just a minute. Her voice became thick with emotion. I'm so sorry this has happened to you. It's all my fault. Jeff could hear her sobbing. Even though he felt overwhelmed at his situation, the thought of the beautiful young girl blaming herself for his condition was too much. Paige, please don't. If you start crying, then I'll start crying, then the nurse has to come change my bandages. He was rewarded with melodic laughter as she was caught between sniffling and laughing. He also picked up a noise from the far side of the room. It distracted him for a moment, but he decided his mind was playing tricks on him. Jeff started to feel a little uncomfortable. Here he was, sitting with a young woman he didn't know and had no idea what to say to her. Can you tell me what happened after I passed out? Paige took a second to gather herself. While you were telling me the police were on the way, I started hearing the sirens. The guy who hurt you with the knife tried to run, but when he got to the end of the alley, the police cars pulled in front and hit their floodlights. He tried running past us toward the other end, but there was a fence he couldn't get over. You injured the other one's knee so badly, he never got off the ground. He gave up without a fight. What about the third guy? Jeff said, remembering the strike he used. The paramedics got there right after the police and did that thing where they cut open the throat so he could breathe. You mean a tracheotomy? Yeah, that's it. They said you collapsed his airway. I guess it was pretty close. Noting Jeff's troubled frown, she added, everyone knew it wasn't your fault. You just did what you had to. You were already hurt so badly. I can't believe you were able to do that to him. I wanted to help, but I just couldn't make myself get up. I am so sorry. Don't be sorry. There's nothing you could have done, and if you had gotten hurt, I would have felt like it was my fault for barging in there and starting the fight. I want you to know that when I saw what was happening, I called the cops and then thought about what I was going to do before trying to help. I don't want you to think I just ran in there like it was some cowboy movie. I knew it could be dangerous for you if I did the wrong thing, so I tried to come up with a smart way to handle it. When I saw them, he paused because he didn't want to upset her, getting more physical with you. I just couldn't wait anymore. Are you all right? Paige answered immediately. I had a few cuts and bruises, but it wasn't a big deal. It scared me a lot, but my family's been here since it happened. I just fine, thanks to you. She paused for a moment. Anyway, there was one cop who pulled you off of me. When he saw how badly you were bleeding, he didn't hesitate. He dropped down beside you and put pressure on the cut to stop the bleeding and keep you alive. He refused to move until the paramedics got to you and took over. He stopped by several times, checking to see if you were going to be okay. She paused, not sure if she should tell him the rest. You know, you're famous now. Paige paused to see his confused expression. You've been in the papers, the radio, and the TV. You're a hero. Jeff felt himself blush. Well, I don't feel like a hero. I feel like I got hit by a truck. I'm just glad you're okay. Jeff trailed off as the drugs pushed him back into unconsciousness. Paige sat there holding his hand for several minutes. When she was sure he was out, she leaned forward and kissed him on the cheek. My hero, she said quietly. She looked over at the far end of the room. Didn't I tell you he was perfect? Jeff felt himself coming around again. He had drifted in and out of consciousness all day. The drugs were wearing off a little, and he could feel his chest throbbing. He moaned and tried to move to alleviate the pain. Are you all right? He heard Paige ask. Do you want me to call the nurse? I'm just a little sore. Don't worry about it. What time is it? It's about 6 in the evening, a male voice answered. Jeff was starting to realize how frustrating his situation was. He didn't recognize the voice and had no idea there was even anyone else in the room. Who said that? Paige answered, Jeff, this is my dad, Stephen. He felt someone take his hand. Son, There are no words to tell you how grateful I am. You saved my little girl from something terrible. Anything you ever need is taken care of. All you have to do is ask." Jeff found that his condition caused him to put more stock in the way people sounded. He decided he liked this man immediately. He had a softness to his voice that showed his emotion, but there was a subtle strength to it as well. Jeff thought about what it would feel like to have the girl you raised from a baby come that close to something tragic. It must have been incredibly difficult, and probably made him feel helpless as well. In an odd way, Jeff decided they had something in common. "You don't owe me anything, sir. I couldn't have lived with myself if I didn't do something. I'm just glad she's all right. I'm glad as well." He could almost hear the smile of pride as the man spoke. "You know, the nurses have been complaining to me since you came in here. She won't stay in her room, and they have to threaten to get her to leave yours." "She still has a room? Paige told me she was fine. Is everything all right?" "Well, she broke her wrist and has some nasty bruises, but otherwise she's okay. They told her she could go home, but I think she's staying so they have a harder time keeping her out of here." He smiled at his daughter as he teased her. "Dad, come on," she complained. "Jeff, don't listen to him. I'm fine. I had to stay here for observation, and I'd go crazy sitting by myself in my room. I just come in here and read. That way if you need anything, someone will be here. It's the least I can do." He started to get dizzy from the exertion of talking. It annoyed him that something so simple could wear him out. "Guys, can we talk later? I'm feeling a little woozy." Steve and Paige left him alone as he let himself drift off again. Despite these nice people being so helpful, he couldn't shake the dark mood that seemed to be growing. "You mean you don't want us to see him?" Paige fumed. "Dr. Walcott, that's just not acceptable." "No, that's not what I'm saying," he tried to assure her. "In cases where someone undergoes a severe trauma like the fight, it's common for them to be overwhelmed by the attention people shower on them. Since Jeff is dealing with the loss of one of his senses, it makes him especially susceptible. We don't think it's permanent," he said, then waved his hand trying to cut off Paige's protest. "But nobody can promise him anything. It's very difficult for him to deal with, and he might feel like the attention is something that could be taken away. It's also possible he might feel like being alone sometimes. In a way, he feels responsible for you, and it would be very stressful for him to have to ask you to leave and risk hurting you. I know Katie's time is limited because of her family, so someone other than Paige should make themselves available. We have a fine staff to take care of him, but if someone is going to be a full-time caretaker, it should be only one person. He needs someone he can identify with. They would also need to not be easily offended when he's honest about his feelings. My biggest concern is still him drifting into a depression, so I'd like there to be someone he can talk to or just sit with when he doesn't feel like talking. But we need to keep that attention somewhat limited to avoid making him defensive." They all sat for a minute trying to decide the best way to handle things. Finally, the young blonde woman in back stood up. "All right, that's going to be me." Dr. Walcott couldn't stop himself from smiling. He hoped she would volunteer. He had been very fond of her since he met her, almost 8 years ago. Her charity work at the hospital proved she had the ideal temperament and sense of responsibility to handle the situation. More than that, helping someone like Jeff might be just what she needed too. Jeff stirred, trying to rouse himself. He appreciated the drugs keeping the pain away, but constantly being half asleep was beginning to grate on him. "So are you with us again?" came a soft feminine voice. "Who's there?" Jeff asked, tiring of having to repeatedly ask the same question. "My name is Sara. I'm Paige's sister. I've been around, but it's hard to talk to you with her hovering." Jeff laughed at her insightful statement. He had the same thought several times. To avoid offending Sara, he just said, "She can be determined. That's my sister, determined and impossible to discourage. You know she has the biggest crush on you," leaving Jeff struggling for an appropriate response. "Don't be too impressed with yourself. Before you, it was the guy who ran the roller coaster at the amusement park." He laughed uncontrollably until his chest hurt. Again, he used his new attention to listening and decided this was someone he instantly liked. He wasn't sure if there was anything to this listening thing, but it somehow seemed right. "I never did ask. How old is she?" "Well, Casanova. She's 18 and a freshman in college." "Why, are you interested?" Jeff could hear the mirth in her voice at his expense, but instantly realized she was only teasing him. Sorry, I think that might be a little young for me. I only got a quick look at her in the alley. She is very pretty, but I didn't have any idea how old she actually was. With the mention of the alley, his mood darkened. I am sorry. I didn't mean to be insensitive. Please, the last thing you have to worry about around me is being insensitive. You're right, she is very pretty. She was homecoming queen, head cheerleader, and had requests from a local modeling agency. Dad wouldn't even let her consider it. She was going to college. She paused awkwardly. Like me, she finished quietly. Jeff was almost certain she was hinting at something difficult because of the tone of her voice. He decided it was best to change subjects. The thing in the alley is just so awkward. I'm glad I was there to help, but I always feel like I'm going to say something that will make her relive it. I'm just not sure how I should handle it. She's such a sweet kid. I don't want to say anything to hurt her. Sara cringed as the doctor's words were proven true so quickly. I understand. Don't worry about what to say to me. I'm not exactly the take offense type. She tried to sound casual, but still make sure he understood her point. Say whatever's on your mind, or you can relax and I'll catch up on my reading. I'm here because I'm the one without the commitments. She quickly realized that didn't come out the way she intended, so added, everyone wanted to be here to make sure you were okay. I just had the most availability. They talked for almost an hour before he was finally exhausted. She peppered him with questions about what he liked, what he had been doing before that night, and assuring Jeff that he should tell her if he needed anything, including privacy. The only thing she didn't do was talk about the alley or how grateful she was about him saving Paige. He wouldn't be able to understand how thankful she was anyway. As he drifted off, he realized his bad mood from earlier was gone. He was honestly glad she had kept him company. The next day, at 5 o'clock sharp, she arrived at his room. Hey, good looking. How are you feeling today? Jeff smiled as he realized how good it felt to hear her voice. I'm a lot better than before. I think I've finally gotten past this stupid in and out of sleep thing. I've actually been staying awake longer and have even been able to listen to the news. Paige is right. They've mentioned me several times. It's so strange to hear somebody talk about me like that. I feel like I'm in an episode of The Twilight Zone. Well, don't get too cocky. You're not going to get any hero worship from me, she said, obviously teasing him. I have got a present for you. A present? He thought, thoroughly confused. He heard her rustling through a bag and making some assembly noises. He was about to ask what was going on when he heard a pair of speakers blast. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sam Kinison. He grinned broadly as one of his favorite albums started. Did you buy me a CD player? Sara smiled as she saw her gift had the intended reaction. Better. I got you an MP3 player and had some friends fill it up with stuff for you. She spent the next hour acquainting him with the technology and how to operate it without being able to see. She had bought a pair of powered computer speakers so they could listen together, or he could plug in the headphones. She had bands, comedians, and even weird internet stuff he had indicated that he liked. Jeff didn't know that last night she had written down everything he told her. It cost her a pretty penny and took all day, but she managed to get most of it downloaded. He smiled and thanked her profusely for the thoughtful gift. Now I have a present for you. Since you've never listened to Sam, just sit down and enjoy. Sara spent the next hour laughing until tears streamed down her face. Several times she was embarrassed by things she heard, but she understood why Jeff had expressed such fondness for the strange man with the wild hair. As they laughed together, she thought to herself how glad she was that she volunteered to make sure he was taken care of. Paige was right. He was perfect. No, that's the craziest argument I've ever heard. The guy's a crook and should have his bum run out of Washington. Sara felt herself getting flushed. Jeff had a way of getting her aggravated over things. She realized early on it was because he wasn't just passionate about what he thought. He educated himself on issues ranging from politics to sports to just about everything she could think of. When he challenged her, she really had to dig deep to make her points without him tearing them apart. Jeff tried not to smirk as she lost her cool. It had been 3 weeks since she had begun watching him, and he couldn't get over how amazing she was. She was intelligent, passionate, tender, funny, and incredibly open. When he was able to point out a flaw in an opinion she held, he sat dumbfounded as she actually considered his argument and sometimes changed her mind. He had rarely met anyone so willing to be open-minded about their opinions. She had told him she didn't like comedians who worked blue. The first night with the MP3 player, she didn't make it through 45 seconds of Sam's concert before he actually heard her snort. He loved the way she laughed. It was so full, and without any consideration for propriety. They actually forced a nurse come in and asked them to keep it down. Now they were having another political debate. He was an independent, uninterested in the politics of an issue, but only on what he considered the truth of it. She was a confirmed Democrat who found it hard to believe that someone could make her rethink positions she'd held for years. To Jeff, the best part about the debates was how heated they could be without any hint of acrimony. When they finished this discussion, she'd probably tell him he was awesome, and then they'd check out a new comedian or movie. He knew they'd laugh and joke until it was time for her to leave. Then he'd have to go to sleep without her. He hadn't told her how hard it was for him when she left. It had only been a few weeks, and he warned himself it was at least partially because of his condition, but he was hopelessly infatuated. He didn't say anything because he didn't want to scare her off. She was like his lifeline to the world. He could be in a bad mood, and she'd listen patiently. If he was happy, they'd laugh and fight about politics. If there was a game on, she'd watch while he listened, often with her cheers drowning out his. Most of all, when she wanted to talk, he was thrilled to listen. He wanted to know every detail about her. She was fascinating. The only time he hit a wall was when he talked about her past. He suspected she had been divorced. There was a point in the past she would talk about, but not a day further. Jeff wouldn't push her about it because he didn't want to force her to relate something painful. He didn't want to think about such a truly good-hearted person having to deal with hardship. He had never felt this way about anyone and had been trying to figure out a way to ask if she was interested in more. It was difficult because he knew if she said no, it would make things so awkward he might lose what he had with her. On the other hand, if he didn't say anything, he might lose her because she didn't know he cared. The bandages were supposed to come off in few more days, and the doctors thought he'd be leaving one way or another within a week. Once he was out, he was afraid she might drift away. Jeff didn't want to use his situation to make her feel sorry for him, but he also realized that she had committed to visiting him every day while he was there, and he might never have that chance again. Suddenly he realized she had been talking to him, but he hadn't heard a word. "Hello? Is there anybody in there?" I said if you could actually take a stand on principle, maybe you'd see why you were wrong. Sarah's smile faded as she noticed something wasn't right. She never got the impression he wasn't listening. He was the most attentive person she'd ever talked to. True, part of it was his status as a captive audience, but Jeff was completely genuine. She didn't doubt he would be the same anywhere. "Sara, I really like you. Once I'm out of here, could I take you out?" Jeff held his breath. He couldn't believe he actually said that out loud. He hadn't meant to. It just tumbled out, and now it was too late to take it back. There was a painful silence. In reality, it wasn't long, but to him it felt like hours. "Jeff, I'm sorry," she began. He didn't even hear the rest. There was a pounding in his head as he realized he had just ruined everything. He was so embarrassed he misread her. Since losing his sight, he found that he was really good at picking up on people's intentions and thought he knew Sarah's. "Now what do I do?" he thought helplessly. "Jeff, please understand, I really like you, but it's just not possible." Sara was on the verge of tears. She had been dreading this for over a week. She could tell how strongly Jeff felt for her, but it was nothing compared to the way she felt. The question was how to let him down easily. He couldn't know why she wouldn't date him. She couldn't force herself to have that discussion. She just hoped they'd make it through him getting out of the hospital. Now she knew that wasn't a possibility. "Look, Sara, I shouldn't have put you in that position. I'm sorry, I think I should be alone." He felt so stupid. Here he was, laying flat on his back, completely helpless. How was she supposed to answer him? If she said yes, it might have been out of sympathy. If she said no, he just made her feel like a monster. Now he had to ask her to leave, because all he could do is lay there. She tried to talk to him, but he insisted she leave. As she sadly walked out the door, she wished her life could have been different. At 5 o'clock the next day, Sara didn't come. It was crushing to Jeff, although a part of him expected it. He sat quietly, hoping she'd show up and pretend he hadn't screwed everything up. He knew it probably wouldn't work. He had put her in an impossible position, and nothing she did would satisfy both of them. If she tried to apologize, he'd feel like a cripple. If she said she wanted to go out with him, he knew it would be out of sympathy. If she still said no, he'd be too embarrassed to act the same around her. He felt lonelier than he ever had in his life. He drifted off to sleep while thinking about his situation. He was awakened some time later by the feeling of a wet sponge moving on his chest. As he woke, he grumbled about wanting to do this later. "Sorry, it's time for your bath," came the hushed reply. Jeff was startled at what he thought he heard, then decided it was just his imagination. He relaxed, hoping this would be over quickly. He wasn't in the mood for the normal small talk the nurses made, trying to make sponge baths less uncomfortable for the recipient. He sat still, wondering why this felt different tonight. The way the wet cloth dragged across his chest, slowing at his dugs, made him a little uncomfortable. Whether it was intentional or not, he was getting turned on. He had been lying there for more than 3 weeks without any chance for a normal sexual release. As he felt the soft cloth slide down his stomach, his was getting uncomfortably hard. It wasn't the first time he'd had this problem. He tried to joke. "Sorry, I think I've been here alone a little too long." The nurse just shushed him and kept at her work. She seemed to be dwelling on more sensitive spots of his body than normal, and the whole thing was definitely moving slower. He was really getting agitated about his condition, but tried to relax and focus on something else. That changed when he felt her slip his covers lower and run the fabric slowly down. He knew this was completely inappropriate. "Listen, I am sorry, but just be quiet and let me enjoy myself," he heard Sara scold. Jeff tried to push himself up. "Sara?" She pushed firmly against his shoulder so he would lay back down. "Listen, buddy, I had to bribe the nurse to let me give you your bath, so I want my money's worth, all right?" He felt a flood of emotions. After believing he had ruined everything, there wasn't any way for him to process what was happening. He wanted her so badly, but this sudden turnaround was stunning. He couldn't imagine what could have happened to trigger this. Sara was trapped in her own emotional confusion. She never intended it to go this far. She wanted to tease him a little and then apologize for the way she acted yesterday. It was supposed to be a little joke. As she ran the rag across the scar on his chest, she couldn't help thinking about how he got it, and the irony of her being the one to lose control over a guy. That was normally something her little sister would do. There was something about Jeff that she couldn't get out of her system. It was something she never could have anticipated, and something she thought she'd never feel again. The more she tried to keep her feelings about him in check, the more completely out of control she felt. The touching started something tingling inside her that quickly became a rush of emotions she just wasn't equipped to deal with. She watched his body with a detached fascination, the damp cloth leaving a glistening trail across his muscles as she moved it down his chest to his stomach. When she reached his waist, she noticed him becoming hard. It was impossible to ignore under the flimsy hospital garment. Then she did something so foreign to her character that before tonight she would have sworn it was impossible. On an impulse, she found herself moving the cloth lower, using her free hand to pull his gown and blanket out of the way so she could touch him. The fabric grazed his sensitive skin along with the tips of her fingers. Her skin brushing against his warm flesh caused a surge to run through her body, making her to lose what was left of her will. Jeff spoke, almost breaking the spell she seemed to be under, but she told him to be still, unable to bring herself to stop touching him. The wall that normally protected her was nowhere in sight. The only thing she could think about was trying to bring him pleasure. Jeff had given up trying to understand what was going on. Sara's touches felt so amazing that he pushed everything else out of his mind. There was an unexpected consequence to his condition. Without being able to see what was going on, he found that her every touch seemed far more intense than normal. The fingers of her other hand slowly stroked a spot on his chest. She moved the wet cloth down and let it travel lower, then back again. His bums came off the bed as the pleasure was almost more than he could take. "You better not move too much, or you'll pull out your stitches. I'd like to see you explain that to the doctor." He heard her softly chuckle at the idea of that meeting. Although the thought was amusing, he couldn't concentrate on anything except her delicate touches. There was an awkward, almost innocent quality to her caresses. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Jeff asked, suddenly afraid that if she went too far, it could push her away again. "I don't want you to." "Oh shit," he groaned. as he felt her warm breath. It caused him to break out in goosebumps, and he grabbed the edges of the bed. She continued teasing him, making the experience even more pleasant. He kept flexing his fingers, balling his hands into fists, anticipating her mouth touching him. For what seemed like an eternity, he felt like he was undergoing sort of wonderful torture. When the touch finally came, it was so soft and quick, he thought he imagined it. He held his breath, afraid he might miss it a second time, trying to almost will it to happen again. When it did, he couldn't remember ever feeling that aroused. "Oh, Sara, that feels so good." His bums lifted slightly off the bed, and she took his reaction as encouragement. He took the hint and let her continue what she was doing. It seemed like her confidence was growing because she was becoming more aggressive. As his breathing settled into a regular rhythm, he felt the cloth she was using move across his chest. He assumed Sara was cleaning him up. She moved up his body, kissing him lightly on the lips. She laid down against him, with her head on his shoulder. They sat together silently for a short time. Finally, Jeff couldn't take the uncomfortable silence. "Sara," he spoke softly, "that was wonderful. I just don't understand what happened. You said, well, you know," he trailed off, unable to find words to express his feelings. He heard her take a deep breath, knowing she wasn't sure what to say. Whether she was looking for the right words or the right lie, he couldn't tell. "Jeff, I don't know how to explain it. I wanted you to know how I really feel about you. I guess I got a little carried away. I hope you don't mind," she finished with a chuckle. She kissed him on the cheek, then pulled away. Jeff couldn't see her smile, but he could tell it was there. "I guess that wasn't the worst surprise I've ever had." He tried to sound jovial and confident, but couldn't shake his confusion. He had no idea where this left them and was afraid to ask. The last thing he wanted was to make things awkward again. They held each other quietly until she excused herself to go to the bathroom. Slowly, he sat up while she was gone. His chest still hurt, but it was better. He leaned back and relaxed, trying to figure out his next move. He didn't want to say the words, even in his own head, but he knew exactly how he felt about her. She seemed to feel the same, but there was something wrong. Was she afraid this was some sort of Florence Nightingale crush? If that's what she thought it was, how did her actions make sense? "I need to stop being a moron and just be myself," he quietly scolded himself. "What's that, Jeff?" He heard her voice back in the room. "I was just annoyed with myself because of putting you in that position yesterday. I am sorry. I like you, but it wasn't fair for me to put you on the spot. I'm glad you came back tonight." He paused, then added with a smile, "Part of me is extremely glad." He hoped she'd take his jest as a sign that he wouldn't push the issue of them dating, at least for now. "Well, I'm glad I came back too," she said, kissing him on the cheek. "Things are still complicated for me, but I wanted you to know I do care deeply for you. I just got a little carried away. I never imagined myself doing something like that," she continued, her tone betraying her sincere surprise. There was an uncomfortable silence as they each tried to think of what to say next. Jeff decided it would be best to take the pressure off of her. "How about if we just listen to the new album you got me?" "That would be nice," she said gratefully. His considerate gesture reminded her of just how special Jeff was. She thought he'd want to talk about things between them, which frightened her, because she had no answers. Like always, he seemed to know exactly what she was thinking. There simply wasn't a frame of reference for her to deal with his insight and compassion. She sat next to him and resisted the urge to hold his hand. They talked quietly about nothing for the rest of the night. When she left, she still wasn't sure if she did the right thing, but was happy about it anyway. She wondered if he'd ever understand just how nervous she had been. "Hi, Jeff. I was wondering if you'd like some company," an unfamiliar voice said, rousing him from his thoughts about what to say to Sara today. "Well, I guess," Jeff said cautiously. "Who are you?" "My name is Don Williams. I'm a police officer. I was there the night you were in the fight. Are you the officer Paige told me about? The one who saved me?" he said hopefully. "I don't know if saved is the right word," Don said humbly. "I was just in the right place at the right time. Paige told me that you held me together with your bare hands until the paramedics got there." "I'd say saved is exactly the right word," Jeff said gratefully. "Okay then, you're welcome," the policeman conceded. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right and see if there was anything you needed." Jeff stammered. I was wondering. About the fight in the alley. No one has talked to me about that yet. I was kind of nervous. Is everything all right? Geez, Don said, laughing. You think anyone is looking to charge you for what happened? I've had friends asking me if the story was really true. You're a hero. I know, Jeff interrupted, with frustration evident in his voice. Seriously, if she had gotten hurt or worse, nobody would be calling me a hero. They'd be saying I was a stupid-ass vigilante. I'm lucky as hell things turned out as well as they did. I guess, came the reply. I thought you showed a hell of a lot of guts going in there. Everybody knows you called 911 first and tried to talk your way out of it. Nobody thinks you were being a hot dog, if that's what you're worried about. Jeff visibly relaxed, and the two men slipped into an easy conversation. An hour later, when Don announced he had to leave, Jeff felt disappointed. For the first time since the alley, he actually felt on even footing with someone. He was in awe of the stories Don had shared. There was little about being a policeman that Jeff had really understood. When he stood up to go, Jeff asked, "So you're sure I'm not going to be in any trouble?" Those guys were human trash with a long record. If you hadn't stepped in, everyone knows that girl was going to have something horrible happen to her. Trust me, you don't have anything to worry about. When Don left, Jeff realized he felt much more at ease about things. At the same time, he knew there was something that had been bothering him for a while. His talk with Don had brought into focus exactly why it had been upsetting him. The problem now was figuring out if there was anything he could do to change it. Jeff was deep in thought. Sara had been there a little more than an hour, but he wasn't in a good mood despite her presence. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. "It's just one of those days. I'm not sure why, but I've been trying to sort things out." "What sort of things?" Sara asked nervously. "Don't worry," he said, trying to reassure her. "It's about me." He thought carefully before continuing. "Sara, why don't you ever talk about what happened in the alley?" Sara was caught off guard. She stammered a reply. I just thought you'd talk about it if you wanted to." "Okay, let's say I want to. Do you buy into all this hero nonsense?" "What you did for Paige was the most unselfish thing I've ever seen," she said firmly. "You were lucky to come out of it alive. If that's not being a hero, I don't know what is. I want to say something, but I don't want you to get the wrong idea." He paused, trying to collect his thoughts. "I don't think I'm a hero, and in some ways I'm ashamed of myself." When he was greeted with shocked silence, Jeff continued. "Firemen run into burning buildings. The police protect people daily. Soldiers risk their lives. That doesn't even count the people who take care of the sick, feed the hungry." He paused, looking frustrated. "You know what I mean." Sara had no idea where he was going with this. "So what are you saying? You have to save people a lot to be special?" Jeff shook his head. "No, I'm saying people are defined by their actions." He paused, trying to collect his thoughts. "Sara, do you believe in redemption?" "Sure. Don't you?" "I don't know. I'm 30 and barely have anything to show for it. I haven't done any of the things I wanted to when I was growing up.